Thanks for listening to the Red Treehouse, where I tell you scary stories to keep you up at night. You can listen to the Red Treehouse wherever you stream podcasts. Just be sure to follow, like, and subscribe. Oh, and leave a 5-star review. And be sure to follow the Red Treehouse on social media, on Instagram and Threads, at Red Treehouse Pod. An important note: sources for this episode can be found in the show notes. The Red Treehouse is dedicated to my dad. I love you, Pop. I should probably say up front that I'm not the biggest fan of UFO accounts, abduction stories, or conspiracy theories about little green men from distant planets. And it's not because I don't believe in extraterrestrial life. In fact, it's the exact opposite. I firmly believe in life outside our planet, floating somewhere along in the universe. It's just that the stories I've researched have largely felt uninteresting, highly exaggerated and improbable, and frankly, carbon copies of one another. But there's one story that may change my perception of all the other ones, and it involves a man who believed he was leaving Earth aboard an alien spacecraft, and he left a note for his friends and family detailing what he was convinced was going to happen. And here's the thing. In November 1980, Granger Taylor disappeared, having seemingly vanished into thin air. And despite an extensive search that spanned on and off for several years, he was never seen or heard from again. In this episode of the Red Treehouse, we're going to explore the strange and scary disappearance of Granger Taylor. Was he abducted by aliens, as he believed? Or is there a more rational, albeit tragic, explanation for his disappearance? I'll share the story. You decide for yourself. I'm your host, Will. Welcome to the Red Treehouse. Granger Taylor was born on October 7, 1948, and lived in the quiet farming community of Duncan on Vancouver Island, British Columbia. Details about his early childhood are scarce, though it was filled with tragedy, as his father drowned in an accident near the family's cabin on Horn Lake. Granger was a young boy when this happened, and it had a profound, lifelong impact on him. The normally outgoing and energetic child quickly became more withdrawn as he was forced to grow up much sooner than expected. Though he was well regarded as a kind child, Granger didn't have a large circle of friends and was content to participate in activities of his choosing, even if they went against the societal norms. While many kids his age were playing sports or games, Granger preferred the solitude of scrapyards, where he developed an early interest in understanding mechanics. And though he struggled with traditional education, he excelled in working with his hands. One article stated, quote, "Taylor dropped out of school sometime around grade 8 and began working at local mechanical shops and became infatuated with machines." End quote. It was suggested that Granger could look at a machine once and immediately understand its workings. By the time he was a teenager, he demonstrated an unbelievable capability in machinery, and he had the accomplishments to prove it. He restored an old car, rebuilt a bulldozer, and then used that bulldozer to help his neighbors, who for their part, could hardly believe his skill at such a young age. One article stated, quote, "Later, he restored an old steam locomotive that he hauled from the bush. It was eventually featured at the BC Forest Discovery Center in Duncan. One of Taylor's crowning achievements was the restoration of a World War II P-40 Kitty Hawk, which was later purchased by a collector for tens of thousands of dollars. End quote. By all appearances and accounts, Granger Taylor was growing into a well-respected young man who cared for those around him, both inside and outside of his home. This is important because early in Granger's life, we see he was a young man who appeared grounded. He was not prone to exaggeration or embellishment. And something interesting, he did not express an interest in aliens, UFOs, or extraterrestrial life, which makes what happened years later that much more confusing. By the late 1970s, when Granger was in his late 20s, his interest shifted from man-made machines to those built outside our world. He became fascinated with space, astronomy, UFOs, alien abduction stories, and the possibility of extraterrestrial life and intelligence. Something interesting, though purely speculative. In 1977, Columbia Pictures released the Steven Spielberg classic, Close Encounters of the Third Kind, which tells the story of an electric lineman who becomes obsessed with extraterrestrial life after a close encounter with a UFO. I say it's speculative because while we don't know for certain about the impact of the film on Granger Taylor, it was released close to the time he became interested in aliens. As Granger's fascination grew, he read books on space travel and concluded that human beings had vastly underestimated the possibilities within the universe. As he delved deeper, his fascination turned into a personal obsession, and soon enough, his friends and family noticed a stark change in Granger's behavior. According to one article, quote, Granger said he had established telepathic communication with extraterrestrials. He spoke bluntly about recurring dreams in which aliens promised to take him on an interstellar journey. End quote. Something interesting and important. It was reported that during this time in Granger's life, he had begun smoking marijuana regularly and taking LSD. According to one article, quote, friends of Granger said Granger did quite a bit of acid through the summer, but had no bad trips and did not experience any ill effects. They said he frequently spoke about going into outer space and of being in some kind of mental contact with an alien. End quote. Then one day, Granger's obsession turned into a project. He told those closest to him that he was going to build a spaceship, and for the better part of a year, he worked tirelessly to build a life-sized spaceship from various spare parts. One article stated, quote, he built his spaceship out of 2 satellite receiving dishes and outfitted it with a television, a couch, and a wood-burning stove. He became obsessed with finding out how flying saucers were powered, spending hours sitting in the ship and thinking, and often sleeping there. End quote. The ship itself was huge, and though it didn't work, Granger would often sit inside it for hours, sometimes with others, but mostly with himself. And while many thought the spaceship was the passion project of an eccentric man, it appears that it represented something far different for Granger. Because as the 70s turned into the 80s, Granger Taylor became increasingly convinced that he was destined to leave Earth. At some point, Granger told family and friends he believed he could communicate telepathically with aliens. One article stated, quote, he lay there and got mental communications with somebody from another galaxy. He couldn't see them. They were just talking to him in his mind. End quote. Most people dismissed Granger's story as exactly that, a story. Others believed he was sincere, but still didn't think much of it. That is, until Granger claimed the aliens had invited him on board for a 72-month journey through the universe. And those who had previously ignored Granger's wild claims started to take notice, because he spoke as if the trip was going to happen. On November 29, 1980, Granger Taylor got up and quietly left his parents' home. but before leaving, he wrote a note and left it for them to find. Here is the note in its entirety. Quote, "Dear Mother and Father, I have gone away to walk aboard an alien spaceship, as recurring dreams assured a 42-month interstellar voyage to explore the vast universe, then return. I am leaving behind all my possessions to you, as I will no longer will require the use of any. Please use the instructions in my will as a guide to help. Love, Granger." End quote. A quick note. I just read the note exactly as he wrote it, including the grammatical error in the middle. Later that night, after writing the note and leaving it, and during a violent rain and windstorm, Granger climbed into his pickup truck and drove away from his parents' home, into the mountains of Vancouver Island. It was the last time anyone saw him. Concern over Granger's whereabouts began almost immediately, and a wide-scale search was initiated throughout Duncan. Except Granger and his truck were nowhere to be found. 6 years later, in March 1986, forestry workers made a gruesome discovery atop Mount Prevost, just a short drive from Granger's parents' home. There, nestled into the wilderness, they found what appeared to be the wreckage of a pickup truck found inside the blast zone of some kind of explosion. The registration of the truck matched that of Granger's pickup. Human bone fragments were found at the scene, and questions immediately arose as to whether they belonged to Granger Taylor. One article stated, quote, "Until further evidence is found, the RCMP is assuming these are Taylor's. An official coroner's inquest deemed that due to circumstantial evidence found at the blast site, Taylor had been killed. The coroner's office concluded that Taylor had been carrying dynamite in his truck, and at some point, whether on purpose or by accident, it went off." End quote. The discovery only led to far more questions, and in the absence of answers, a host of theories attempting to explain what happened to Granger sprang up. We'll explore the theories surrounding Granger Taylor's disappearance right after this quick ad break. The disappearance of Granger Taylor, while initially strange, took a much darker turn after his remains were found 6 years later. And immediately, numerous theories were offered to try and make sense of what happened to him. An important note: these are simply theories, not official explanations. Even with the best evidence available, the only one who knows exactly what happened, and the reason it happened, is Granger Taylor himself. Perhaps the most well-known theory, and the one that is most readily accepted by his close friends and family, is that Granger Taylor died as the result of an accidental explosion. I already mentioned that while researching, I discovered something interesting. Granger was known to carry explosives in his pickup truck. For some of us, this may seem unusual, but it was actually a common practice, as it allowed farmers and others to remove tree stumps with relative ease. But if that's true, it leaves us with an unsettling question. If Granger was experienced in handling explosives, how would he have died in an accident? This next part is speculative, but many suspect a stick of dynamite became unstable, possibly due to moisture from the storm the night he disappeared. Others believe the explosion occurred because of a fuse malfunction. The unfortunate truth, though, is that all anyone can do is guess, and that feels insufficient, because it doesn't explain why Granger Taylor went into the mountains in the first place. Before we dive into the second theory, let me give a quick discretionary comment. Mental health and substance use struggles are a deeply personal and sensitive topic. Too often, we rush to conclusions that may not be true simply because it makes sense to us. What seems to be true is that Granger Taylor used both marijuana and acid, and that his use increased towards the time of his disappearance. It is also true that he told his family and friends that he was in communication with extraterrestrials and that they were planning to take him on a 42-month journey around the universe. What we don't know, and what we should avoid speculating on, is whether or not he was suffering from a specific mental health or psychotic disorder, and what role, if any, his substance use contributed to his decision-making. Theories surrounding mental health and substance use. There's something else we know about his disappearance. Granger Taylor firmly believed he was in contact with extraterrestrials and of his subsequent journey with them. But by all accounts, he functioned well in other areas of his life. Remember, he maintained a business, built, rebuilt, and operated heavy machinery regularly, and had a positive reputation within his community. In other words, despite his convictions about aliens, there was no evidence something was amiss. This next theory seems to be the most widely accepted by investigators and the general public: that Granger Taylor died by suicide on November 29, 1980. The strongest piece of evidence is the note he left for his parents, and over the years, many have interpreted the 42-month journey not as a trip around the universe, but as a final goodbye. A few more details stick out from the note. First, the statement about leaving his possessions behind. Even though he claimed he'd be gone for 42 months and then return, this statement reads with a measure of finality, as if he wasn't expecting to return once he left. And second, the instructions for his parents to use his will as a guide. A will is only executed after a person dies, not while they're still alive. There's something interesting. While researching, I came across an article that contained an interview with one of Granger Taylor's friends. And in it, the friend clarifies that the 42-month journey simply meant that Granger understood the journey would only age him by 42 months, but that because of extreme time dilation, Granger understood that thousands of years would pass by on Earth, and that he would never return in anyone's lifetime. With regards to this theory, it's important to remember that Granger Taylor's close family and friends do not believe he died by suicide. They point to his demeanor in the days and weeks leading to his disappearance, and most notably, what wasn't present, namely, hopelessness and despair. As a mental health and substance abuse counselor, I won't add to the speculation surrounding these two theories. The unfortunate reality is that many people suffer in silence, and while their outward appearance, countenance, and functioning seem quote-unquote normal, they are struggling internally, far away from what we experience in our relationship with them. We simply don't know what Granger Taylor was dealing with, or not, and should be careful in how we discuss it. And finally, the most fantastical theory is that Granger Taylor was, in fact, abducted by aliens and taken across the universe. Remember, this was his firm conviction, and this theory simply interprets his beliefs literally. Proponents of this theory point to the recurring dreams that he believed were genuine communications, building a life-size spaceship, and his firm conviction that extraterrestrials had arranged the pickup. What's fascinating is that Granger Taylor lived his last few months in preparation for whatever he believed was going to happen, and his story remained consistent, even as he offered more details. Despite all of the theories, the only things we know for sure are that Granger Taylor walked out of his parents' home on November 29, 1980, and was never seen or heard from again. And for years after his disappearance, his family kept the gate and door unlocked, just in case he showed up from wherever he went. It's likely we will never know exactly what happened to Granger Taylor in late November 1980. For me, I think I hold to a hybrid theory. That Granger genuinely believed he was going to meet extraterrestrials, and that they were taking him on a 42-month journey. I believe this was his motivation. And I also believe he died atop Mount Prevost, though I won't go so far as to assert whether it was accidental or intentional. What this case reminds me of is twofold. There seems to be an inherent human quality that we want to know the truths of the universe. This desire shows up in questions like, what happens when we die? Or what is the meaning of life? Some say it has to do with connection, that a major part of our purpose here is to find deep connections with other people, and that a major hope is that when we leave here, we can maintain some sort of connection wherever it is we go. This case also reminds me that our beliefs can have profound implications and either benefits or consequences for ourselves and the people around us. That a belief system often guides our decisions, and that we may not fully understand or appreciate the implications of those decisions until far later. For me, the story of Granger Taylor is tragic, in part because it remains as mysterious today as it was nearly 50 years ago, and in part because Granger Taylor's life was cut far too short. As we close this episode of the Red Treehouse, we're left with this lingering question. What happened to Granger Taylor in 1980? Was he abducted by aliens, or is there a more natural explanation? I've shared the story. Now you decide for yourself. I'm your host, Will. Thanks for joining me in the Red Treehouse.